Okay, so today I'm gonna discuss how I made my holder so I can use my iPad with a tripod. So first things first, I took a piece of paper that was large enough to trace out my iPad on, and marked where the bottom was on it, which I did right here. And then I just traced out with the case on it because I want to have the case on it when I use my iPad. I don't want to have to be removing it in and out of the case. I'm fortunate enough that the case I have for my iPad works quite well and doesn't really make it too handy to use. So once again, I did this all with the case on. So now that I've got my template made out, I'm ready to start. So before I start, I may as well get my material ready. So I'll let you know what I used. Okay, so the first thing I need is approximately a 40-inch long piece of half-inch rigid PVC electrical conduit. Next, I needed a 1-inch long quarter-inch thread machine stove bolt. I needed some fleece material. I just actually got some scrap pieces of fabric and I made up a sleeve basically, just so that it protected the iPad when I got put in the holder and didn't scratch it up. And I chose fleece because it's nice and soft. And the last actually piece of material I used to make it up is a plate with two female quarter-inch machine thread threads tapped into it. What I actually used, simply because being an electrician making this up, I have electrical parts kicking around. I used half of an old clamp that they used for attaching a ground wire to metal water pipe system, which actually is pre-tapped with two quarter-inch threads on either side, which is exactly what I wanted. So that's the actual material you're going to need. You'll need a few tools to do this as well. For me, what I used, just a simple needle and thread to sew the fleece material. Um, I actually took a handful of 8 half-inch number 6 woods or sheet metal screws as well to just kind of hold the fabric in place and keep it away from getting inside the lens of the or in front of the lens of the camera. Um, I I also so you'll need a screwdriver and a heat gun, I guess, and that's really about it. Maybe something for a straight edge, those sort of things, but other than that, you don't need a lot of special tools. So, like I was saying, I used a piece of 40-inch long, half-inch PVC rigid conduit. You can pick it up at any hardware store, and that's what I used to actually make it out of. That's the actual structure of it. So the first thing to do is to actually, mine was 40 inches long, so at the 20-inch mark, or exactly half of it, I put a mark with a pencil, and I actually ended up tracing it all the way around. That way it makes it much easier to work with. Then I made two more marks. One from if you're measuring from the end, at the 15-inch mark, and then one also at the 25, so 5 inches off the center each way. That'll actually be kind of where you'll expect to see the edges of your iPad when you put it in for the bracket. So that'll be your guide for making that bottom groove in there that we're going to make. And once again, trace that all the way around to help yourself out later. Now what you want to do is I got my tape measure on my center mark, and I'm going to mark 9 inches either way from the center. That'll be where I'm going to make my bends in my conduit when I heat it up. So these are important. Draw them all the way around as well. Be as accurate as you can with these. And here I am. I've moved my tape measure now. I'm going to make my other mark 9 inches the other way. So I've got the two marks both 9 inches off of center in both directions. Once again, making my mark all the way around. Okay, so the next step, and be careful when you're doing this next step. Don't do this on the kitchen table. You'll damage the covering on it. I took mine to my basement where it's unfinished and did it on the concrete floor. So there you see I have a good heat gun, and I've got it cranked up and I'm heating up the conduit now. And you'll keep doing this till it gets to the point where it can move fairly easily. It won't take very long for half-inch conduit to get to the point where you can actually fold it right over. And I'm going to do this one side at a time. Now, before you do this, have a wet cloth handy with cold water, And that way when you get folded, the conduit folded in position, wipe it down with the wet cloth and it'll set up and you don't have to sit there and hold it very long. So this is done at each separately. You'll do the one first at the 9-inch off center, the one direction, and the 9-inch center off the other direction, and fold it. Make sure you have your piece of paper handy when you do this of the outline of your iPad as well. So here what I have done is it's gotten heated well enough. I simply fold it over. Don't worry about kinking it right in this area right here. It's not You're not running conductors through it, so it doesn't matter if it kinks a little bit. It's going to be pretty tough with the angle you're putting on it not to. So as you see right here, right here, that's the line for the edge of the iPad. I'm going to try and line it up with the paper there and fold it so that when I get to this area here, it's going to be not just to the corner, but the corner is going to go into the back of the conduit, in other words, to right about here of the paper. Also, don't forget that when you set your iPad in here, down about here is where the iPad's going to sit. So make sure the bottom of the conduit actually lines up with the bottom line that you drew previously. That's all very important. And then once you have this done, take your wet cloth, wet it down, hold it down once you got it in place, rub it against the conduit to cool it down quick. And once it looks good, simply do the same for the second side so that you have a nice angle. So as you can see here now, I've got my pipe with both angles on both sides to the way I want it. And I took it out to my shop now where I have my vise. If you don't have this, be very careful how you do what you use to hold it. Find something to hold it or something like that, or have a friend hold it for you. Make sure you have safety glasses on for both you and gloves when you do this, because you're going to be using an angle grinder for this next step and you don't want anybody getting hurt. So this is what it should look like before you take it out to the shop. Get it in your vise, get ready to go, hold it nice and securely. And next you'll pull out your angle grinder and start making some grooves in it. So next here I pull out my angle grinder, and as you can see the angle grinder will make grooves really nice and easily. And we're going to cover this up in the end, so you don't have to be neat, but try to be as straight as you can. And make the groove so it fits a little more than just your iPad itself. I think my iPad, when I measured it, was around 3/8 of an inch. So make it so the iPad will fit in there well, because we're going to cover this with fabric afterwards. You don't want a really tight fit because the actual clamp itself will hold it in. You don't want to be scratching it when you put it in. So make your groove now, take it out, test it. If it doesn't look like it's right, come back and redo it. So when you're done grinding with the angle grinder, making your groove on the bottom there where your iPad's going to sit into, it should look something like this. Lots of room to sit in and fairly straight along this area here. That way it just sits in nice and doesn't have to be forced in. Okay, the next step is to kind of figure out where we need to make the slots into the holder to hold the top of the iPad. Now before doing this, there's going to be a whole lot of just pieces and dust and that in these areas here. So be careful when you do this that you don't get that all over your iPad. What I did was I took an air compressor that I happen to have and put a nozzle on it and blew out all the dust and everything first. And we're still not protecting it from the iPad, so don't do everything very nicely here so you don't scratch it. Be very cautious at this point. So what you'll do once you get the iPad into that bottom groove, have it so it's fully seated down right here in this area here. Then you'll come up to here and you'll make your marks like I have here of where your iPad's going to sit. Make sure you do this on both sides as well. So now that you've got those marks made on here, which you can't really see them, but they're about there and there, come back out to the shop again, and I just put my grinder in a bit. Now be careful when you're using the grinder. I should have mentioned this earlier too, that you don't go through the other side. It would be a big deal if you do in this case, because you're covering in fabric. But later on, I'm going to actually put screws through to kind of hold the fabric in place. That's my personal preference. And if you make the slot there, you won't have anything to bite the screws to. So once again, come and just make your slots the same as you did before. here, so that it holds the top of your iPad and it's not thick enough. And make sure you flip it over once you're done and do it on both sides. Don't be afraid to clean it out. Use your air pressor, compressor, whatever you happen to have. Shake it out real well and just go try it. If it needs to be tweaked, then just come back and keep tweaking. Do a little bit at a time, and you can always take a little more off. If you do too much at once, then it's pretty tough to add it back in. So do a little bit at a time and get it right the first time. So now what I've done here is just to cut off the excess and to make it kind of just a little nicer for this area here and this area here. Simply, the top of my slots are right here and here. So I simply used this piece of plywood here as a straight edge, and I'm going to draw a little line right here and right here across there, and then just going to cut that off with a hacksaw just to make it a little neater and a little nicer. So now the next thing I have to do is I have to put a hole here, big enough for my 1/4 inch bolt that I'm using. You can use whatever size you want. For me, I use 1/4 inch because it's 1/4 inch on to attach to the camera tripod that I'm using. I think that's pretty standard size as well. So I flipped it over. What would actually be happening here is if this was my tripod, it's actually like this. So I've just got it upside down in the vise right now. This is my center point right there that I had marked previously, and I'm just going to drill a hole through to put a screw in the bottom of it to hold it to its base that I'm going to make up here in a bit. Okay, so I didn't take step by step directions here because the rest is fairly simple to do. So I'll just simply outline it here. All I did was down here where I got that hole drilled, I simply made a hole. First of all, I guess I made some fabric up, like so, and I put it on. I didn't sew the ends up yet. I just had it sewn so that I could slide it on. And then I simply took this plate that I have here for mine. It's that grounding bushing I used, and I simply attach it. You could use any plate. Just a square piece of metal would work just fine. You may have to drill it out and tap it if you use that. Mine was pre-trapped, which is probably the reason I used it. So then I made that hole in the bottom, which would be about right in there. So then, now that I've got that done, I simply take my 1 inch long 1/4 inch bolt, and I simply insert it through that way and attach it into there. So now that I've got that attached to the base, then once I'm happy with everything, I can sew up the ends here of my tubes. And on my tripod, and I think that most are pretty much the same, this other piece here just has screws onto a stud that's on the tripod base. And you're pretty much done then. After I took this picture, I actually folded some of the material in here, here, and here, and I used some very short 1/2 inch 632, or not 632, number 6 machine screws, and kind of folded the material in a little bit. The problem I was having is if I wasn't careful on the front of the camera here where the lens is, some of the material might hang in front of it and take up part of the screen. By simply doing that, I got rid of that. Plus, it makes it look just a little bit neater, I believe. So that was it. Not much to it. If you did some modifications to it, you could probably come up with something. But I think it seems to hold the iPod in very well. I don't think there's much chance unless you hit it pretty solidly that it would fall out and damage itself. And I think it'll work well. So good luck to you if you decide to follow this way and make one of your own.